Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, La Fraise. I'm Noémie and today we are going to make a beautiful gathered skirt together. So I realized that everyone and the dog and the cat and the mom has made gathered skirts on YouTube, and I really hesitated, like, is it interesting for me to make also a tutorial about this or not? So I realized maybe you already have plenty of tutorials that are fine for you, but I still thought I had a little bit of a different take on it that could be interested to add in a mix. So if this is the gathered skirt for you, I'm very pleased. I will explain everything in great details. So if you're a total beginner with sewing, I'm really going to take you by the hand and you are going to be fine, and you are going to make a skirt that has super neat and polished finishes. You'll see I'm very keen to have very luxurious finishes even without a serger. So if you are interested in this, then let's get right in. So to do this project, you will need your fabric. So I would recommend, if you're a beginner, either a cotton or a linen. Those fabrics are really stable and so they're going to be a lot easier to sew. If you have already sewn a little bit, you could go with a viscose or any type of those more flowy fabrics, and those ones are going to give you a very different feel because they're going to drape in a very different way. I will not give you a yardage for this tutorial because it is going to depend on your size. I will tell you in a second how you need to cut your pieces, and you can quickly do the math and then see what yardage you need. I will give you the simple version where you have to do as little math as possible. I'm promising you, like, it's going to be super easy. Take the calculator on your phone and you're going to be totally fine. And I will also give you the choose your own adventure option if you feel a bit more confident and you want to take the rein on this make. So actually, I quickly wanted to show you what the skirt would look like with quite a stiff linen. So if you get a cotton or linen that's a little bit more drapey, that's a little bit more flowy, you're going to be able to see it when you take it at the store and you kind of touch it. This was a bit of a thicker linen that I had bought to make pants with, and the issue of a thicker linen that you could make pants with is that it does create quite a stiff skirt. So you can see this one has quite a lot of structure. So if you want something a little bit more flowy, make sure you take quite a flowy fabric. And you will need a thread that matches the color of your fabric choice. You will need an elastic that is large enough to go all around your waist. And I would recommend an elastic that's a little bit tall like this one and that has a little bit of power into it. If you feel like the elastic is super flimsy, you have to imagine it's going to have to carry the weight of your entire skirt. So it's not going to be great. You can see this one is nice and sturdy and it has a little bit of height, so it's going to be very comfortable on the waist. You don't want to take something that's too narrow. It's not going to be able to like hold the skirt on you, and something that's too flimsy and that's not going to also like hold the weight of the skirt. Obviously, you need a sewing machine and sewing needles. If you are using a cotton or linen, universal needles are going to be perfect. If you are using a viscose, maybe talk with the lovely people at the fabric store to see what needle they recommend for the specific fabric you have chosen. Okay, so we are not cutting our fabric yet. The first step when you come back from the fabric store is to pre-wash your fabric. You can't miss this step. If you don't pre-wash your fabric, it might shrink after you finished your garment, and the skirt that you have made to the perfect size, the perfect length, might shrink and end up not the perfect size and length you wanted. So before you do anything, we pre-wash the fabric and now we're going to cut it. So here's the cutting layout for you. You're going to need two big rectangles. The width of the rectangle is going to be the circumference of your waist times 2.5 divided by 2. And the height is going to be 56 centimeters, that is 22 inches. For the bottom of your skirt, you might need to piece this from more than 2 pieces, depending on the width of your fabric and depending on your waist size, but you are going to take the size of your waist times 3.5, the height is 30 centimeters, that's 12 inches, and you are basically going to hopefully cut it in 2 to 3 pieces. And for sewing, don't worry, we'll come to this and we will talk about how we piece them together, but basically make sure that you have enough of this long band to go around your waist 3.5 times. And have a little bit of extra fabric for your pockets if you do want some. And that's it. If you don't want to understand what's happening behind those numbers and you're already feeling a bit overwhelmed, go and cut those pieces and go and look in the chapter to go straight to the instructions. I'll meet you there. For people who like to understand what's happening behind the numbers and who maybe want to tweak the dress to their own liking, stay with me now because I'm going to explain this to you right now. So basically for this skirt pattern, you are going to take the skirt, and I basically have 2/3 of the skirt on the top and 1/3 on the tier. If you want to alter the length of your skirt, the way you would measure this is to hold your measuring tape not with the one at the top, but letting the one, sorry you can't see my feet, but letting the one hang below, because this way you can kind of look in the mirror and see which length you like, and you just hold on to whichever part is the number you want, and you look and you have your garment length. If you were to take the one at the top here, when you would lean to go and look at the length, you're actually moving the meter, and so therefore it is easier to let the one dangle down and to measure it like this. If you are choosing your own adventure, you could also choose to have a much lower waist skirt than I'm choosing. This is totally up to you. The measurements later on are not going to change, but it is going to change the length of your skirt and obviously the width of your elastic here. So I've already told you the measurements for the standard skirt I'm offering to you right now, but if you want to alter the length, what I recommend you do now is you put 2/3 of the length on top and 1/3 on the bottom, and then you need to add 4.5 centimeters on top. That is to account for folding your fabric over once so that the raw edges are enclosed, and the height of your elastic. If your elastic is particularly tall, maybe give yourself a little bit more room there. And on the bottom, I'm giving you 1.5 centimeter of seam allowance, that's 1/2 inch. For the sides of the panels, I'm not adding any seam allowance. We already have 2.5 times your waist circumference, and honestly, it's going to be totally fine. We don't have to fiddle with an extra 3 centimeters there. It's going to be enough wiggle room so that we have a bit of space. For the bottom part, you're going to take the last third, and then you're going to add 1.5 centimeter of seam allowance on top, that is 1/2 inch, and 3 centimeter on the bottom for the hem, and that's going to be a bit over 1 inch. I really hope that this was not confusing and that this is helpful to understand how to make it your own if you desire to. For your pockets, you are going to cut 2 pairs of pockets. A pair means that they are mirroring each other like so you can see they are a pair, and either you have a pattern that you already know and like, and you know that you like the shape and the size of the pockets, that's very fine. Steal the pocket from any pattern you like, but if you do not have a pocket pattern piece, let me show you how you're going to make your own. So you are going to place your hand on a sheet of paper like this, and you're going to start by tracing 2 lines that are going to be about 1.5 centimeters, so that's 5/8 of an inch, and that's just going to make sure that you have a little bit of space here to sew your pocket flat. So imagine then we're going to do, okay, like take a ruler to make sure it's straight, but you know, you're gonna start to have something that starts straight, so that's an easy straight line to sew onto the side of your skirt. And then I'm going to put my hand kind of like this, because when I put my hands in my pocket, you know, I don't put them sideways, I put them a bit down, and then you're just going to draw a rough shape like this. Sorry, I had to redo it off camera because it was very, very hard to do with the viewfinder. But you know, you see that you have a little bit of space to move your fingers, make your pocket the size you like, and then you're going to add 1.5 centimeters of seam allowance again, so 5/8 of an inch, to make sure that you have enough. So you're gonna measure really well. Sorry, it's very bad, I'm looking in the viewfinder. And you're going to add your seam allowance all around, 5/8 of an inch, 1.5 centimeters. And then you're going to cut that piece. Please draft it more neatly than I have, and that's going to give you something like this. Get it? So you cut 2 pairs because obviously you need 2 sides of your pocket for each side of your body. So in this video, we're going to sew everything with French seams. If you don't have a serger, French seams will give you a very professional finish on all of your seams, and you're going to have an incredibly neat skirt inside and out. If the thought of French seams is totally scaring you, you can always sew the seam the regular way. If you have already done pockets in your life, just do it the normal way and you'll be totally fine. I'm going to show you, however, how to do everything with French seams today if you want a super polished finish on your skirt. Hey, Noémie from the end of the video. I just wanted to have a quick word because I have got feedback on the previous tutorial I have made, but sadly when I got the feedback I had already filmed the entirety of this video, and so actually I have not filmed sewing the actual seams of this skirt. So basically I'm showing you really everything except sewing a straight line, which I hope you can do by yourselves. So I really apologize that at the moment there's not that little extra step of really showing you sewing the line. I will try to have it in the future, and I'm sorry this video doesn't have it. I'm really trying to get better with every video. Sadly, this one was already recorded before I got the feedback, so the feedback has been heard and taken into account, and next time you will also see the actual sewing in the sew along and the tutorials. I still hope that this is useful. I really show you as much as possible without showing you the actual sewing, so I really hope this helps. Enjoy making the skirt! So we're going to start with the pocket bags. This is my main rectangle of fabric, and I'm going to place 12 centimeters from the top, that's 4 inches 3/4. And watch out, we are going to start by putting wrong side against wrong side. So my fabric doesn't have a wrong and right side, which is going to make this a bit tricky, but I'll always make sure it's very clear. If my fabric had flowers, I wouldn't see them right now. The flowers would be on the right side here. So we are going to put wrong side against wrong side, which means I see the right side of my pocket and I don't see the right side of my skirt. And I'm going to stitch this at 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch from one clip to the next. If you feel more secure putting a ton of pins along the way, feel free to put them all. Make sure you remove the pins before you sew over them. If you don't have specialized pins, you're not supposed to sew over your pins. It could damage your machine. And if you have chosen to follow your own adventures, you don't have to place your pocket exactly at 12 centimeters like I am. You could always put the panel on you and see how high or low you would like your pockets, but keep in mind that you do need to leave a little bit of a space for the elastic casing. Let's sew our first line of stitching here. The settings on my machine are a straight stitch at 2.5 millimeter and 0 width. The tension is automatic or 4. And for each seam line we are going to do, if I don't tell you otherwise, these are the settings you're going to use. And you're always going to start with a couple of stitches, back stitch a couple of stitches, and then sew your entire seam. When you are finished your seam, you go back stitch a couple of stitches, and then you can clip your threads. Okay, so you can see the line of stitching here, and what I will do is I will clip the seam allowance to the seam line, so just here, so you can see that now there's a bit of space here. Same on the other side. And then I'm going to trim the seam allowance half. So we're going to do this every time, and the reason is that when we sew the next part of the French seam, we want to make sure that the seam allowance inside is small enough so that there's not little pieces of fabric poking out. If I do like this and imagine I don't trim enough, you could see this little line of fabric here, which doesn't look really good. So we're going to make sure that we trim this. So you trim half of the seam allowance only at the pocket level, don't go past the 2 places you have clipped. Trim this, just like this, and now I'm gonna go to my iron and press this nicely open, pressing the seam allowance towards the pocket bag. So you can see my seam is nice and pressed. I'm now going to fold it right on the seam like so, put my clips. If you feel like going once more to the ironing board to actually press this nice and flat, feel free to do so. Not if you have plastic clips though, then make sure you have pins that are only metal or that have a glass head, but you don't want to melt your pins on your fabric. Personally, I'm just going to go like this, but once more I'm going to go from pin to pin, not going further than the pockets, and I'm going to sew this at 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch. To be nice and precise, I recommend you stitch this with the pocket facing up to you. That's going to be easier. And that's it, your first pocket is attached. So this is the right side. If you had flowers on your fabric, you would see them here on the right side of the pocket, and you can see it is sewn right side to right side with a beautiful French seam behind it. So you can see absolutely no raw edge poking out. Now you're going to take this and take it once more to the iron to press the seam allowance towards the pocket bag and make sure that this is nice and flat. Here we are. We're almost done with the pocket, guys. Only one more step. I'm going to do one line of top stitching on the seam line here. So I'm just going to come here, basically between the edge of the seam allowance and the edge of the seam here. I'm going to come in between and sew one line of stitches so that the seam allowance is attached to my pocket. So we're going to do that now. Here you are, guys. As you can see, this is very lovely and neat on the other side as well. It looks good. Personally, I'm using leftover thread, so this doesn't match perfectly. If you have a thread that matches your pocket bag better, it's going to show a little bit less than mine. Oopsie, but anyway, that's in your pocket, so it doesn't really matter. And now you have done your first pocket. You have 4 pieces like this. So now you're going to do exactly the same on the other side, and then again twice on the other piece of fabric. We have the left side here. You're going to do exactly the same with the right side, and then on your other piece of fabric. Make sure that you measure accurately this measurement every time, so 12 centimeters or 4 inches 3/4 if you're doing like me, or if you're using any other measurement, make sure this is matching every single time. Otherwise, when it will be time to match your pockets together, they won't align. So this is the part where you really want to be careful. So go and do this. I'll see you there. Okay, so now we're going to take the 2 sides of our skirt and we're going to match the side seams wrong side against wrong side. That means that if my fabric had flowers, you would see the flowers here, you see the right side of the pocket here, right side of the pocket here. Yeah, I was missing fabric, so they don't match, but this is the right side on both sides, and you would see the flowers here. So wrong side against wrong side. This is always the brief, and we are going to stitch at 6 millimeter, 1/4 inch seam allowance. All the way here, you go 6 millimeters in, and then you go all around your pocket bag, all the way here, and then down here, all the way down. So we're going to go all there, all around the pocket, there. Do not sew across here, otherwise you're going to sew your pocket bag shut, which you obviously don't want. So doop, shoop, and down. 6 millimeter seam allowance, you can do this. If you notice some tension here at the corner of the pockets, here and there, do not hesitate to clip it a few millimeters further. Go very gently, you don't want to go past this line, but if you need to clip a little bit more to free up some tension here and here, don't hesitate to do so. When you arrive at the corner of the pocket, and you'll do the same when you arrive down here, a way to pivot very neatly. So I have gone already the 6 millimeter, 1/4 inch in, because you don't want to kind of like stop as you touch the pocket, because you still need the seam allowance that way as well. So you go already the seam allowance width in, and then as you can see, my needle is planted in my fabric. Now I can lift my presser foot, pivot my fabric, and put it back down, and ta-da! Now I can sew this way, and my angle is going to be super crisp. Okay guys, you know the drill. We're gonna trim the seam allowance by half, and then we're going to turn this the other way around and give it a really good press. Let's go. To facilitate turning it over, I'm going to clip the corner. I'm going basically as close as I can without cutting my seam itself. So I'm going to do both corners here. I'm already quite close. So I'm going to clip both corners to make it easier to turn around. Be careful not to cut your seam line. Okay guys, so this has been well pressed. If you need, add as many pins as you want. My fabric is very stable and I've done this a lot, so I'm just going to go for it. But if you need to add pins, please do. I have pressed my seam very well, as you can see, and I'm now going to stitch this at 6 millimeter, which is 1/4 inch. All the way here, I go 6 millimeters in, pivot all the way around here, pivot here. So let's stitch this. Here we are. We're going to turn this the right way around and give it a good press. Pressed the seam allowance and the pockets towards the front, because obviously you put your hands at the front of your body and not at the back, and the seam allowance needs to follow that direction. And I'll show you on the right side what this looks like. As you can see from the inside, we have an incredibly neat finish. From the outside, we have a very neat inseam pocket that's barely visible when it's not open. See, it's just here in the seam. Okay guys, this is the moment of the test. You're going to take the next side and do the same, and the whole top part of the skirt is going to be ready. This is not the end of the homework without me. Come on guys, you can do this. You're going to then take all the narrow pieces that form the bottom part of your skirt, and with that, you're going to put them all together. So for my part, I have 4 different pieces. You might have more, you might have less. It depends on your fabric and on the size of your waist. So once more, you put them all wrong side against wrong side, trim the seam allowance, good press, right side against right side, sew, and then press the seam allowance towards the back. When you have done all that, you're going to have your top piece that's nicely sewn on both sides with the 2 inseams pocket, and you're going to have your bottom piece, which for me is extremely long, so it's like a very, very long tube. You can see my seams are done like this, and my seams allowance are nice and enclosed inside. And so go and do that. Oh my god, this takes so much space. So as you can see, I have a long panel each time, and then I have a short complementary panel. So I think I'll put one of my side seam on this, but you can kind of see what makes the most sense for you. So come and meet me once you have your top piece and your bottom piece ready. You are doing great progress in your skirt. It's going to look so beautiful and so premium with those French seams finishing. So keep working and we'll meet very soon. Okay, so if you are all caught up, we are now going to sew 2 gathering lines at the top of a small ruffle piece, which means that we are going to sew 1 line at 1 centimeter of seam allowance, that's 3/8 of an inch, and 1 at 1.5 centimeters, which is about 1/2 inch. You can go just a little bit past 1/2 inch if you want to. So to do this, you're going to have to start and stop at every seam you have. So for example, on this panel, it's quite small, but I still need my gathering lines, and they can't really go over the seams, otherwise it's not going to gather well. So I'm going to try to go as close to it as possible without catching the seam allowance, but I'm still going to have my 2 lines, and that on my 4 different panels. So no matter how many panels you have, make sure you have all of your lines, because afterwards we are going to gather this bit to match the length of our top piece. So in order to do a gathering stitch, we are going to lengthen the stitch length to the maximum. For me, that's a 4 millimeter. It's not a ton, but if quite possible that your machine goes longer than me, please do so, because mine doesn't go very long. And you're going to not backstitch the start or the end of your seam. You're going to leave long tails so that we can pull on them to gather them. No backstitching now. Okay, let's go. Let's do all of those seams. Okay, so if you've done all of your gathering stitches, it might have taken a little bit of a while, because that's a very, very big amount of fabric that we have here. Now, normally you put your gathering stitches on either side of your seam line, and then you unpick the line that is underneath the seam line. I personally despise doing this. I absolutely can't be bothered, and I have therefore put your second line of stitches on your seam line, which is going to prevent you from having to unpick everything afterward. You'll thank me later. Now, what you're going to do is to try to find the 2 sides of your fabric. So for my part, I have actually matching sides with, I have the 2 seams here for my short side. But so if I go all the way to the end, I have another seam here. Here we are. If you have, for example, 3 or 5 pieces, you might not be able to hold on to 2 seams here. So then you just, see where's the middle and put 2 pins here. Those 2 pins you're going to match with the 2 side seams of your top part. And then we're going to gather the gathered line to make it match the length of the top. Now, we're going to do this as French seams as well. It's a little bit more tricky, but you have a few practice seams under your belt now, so I'm sure you can do this. So remember, wrong side against wrong side to start with. So this seam with the gathered line is going to go at the bottom of the top piece. So if you see my pockets here, the top is facing this way. So I'm going to put the wrong side of the bottom, and then I'm going to slide over the piece here. And before you do anything else, put your stitch length back to what it normally is, because that's typically the type of thing you forget and then you sew everything at a very long stitch length, and then all your future seams are going to be not as sturdy as they should be. Sorry, I realize you have a view on all of Milo's toys and all of the books and stuff. Let's ignore the mess here. This is actually very tricky to show you, but basically you want to attach the ruffle at the bottom of your top piece. This is the wrong side and this is the wrong side. So if your fabric had flowers, you would see the flower on the ruffle here, but not on the ruffle here. So you can see my seams, seams again, seams. And now I'm going to pull on my gathering stitches so that this bit matches this bit. And I'm going to put as many pins as I need to keep those two seams together, because as you can see, it's a lot of volume. Once I have gathered the stitches and put all of my pins, I'm going to do, you know the drill, a first line at 6mm, 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, trim it, press it, turn it, and then my last stitch line, and then we'll be very, very near the end. Gathering takes a while. At this point, I have gathered it to the right length, but what you can see is that I have places that are super bunched up and places that aren't gathered. So I'm going to take a bit more time to make sure that they're evenly gathered and evenly spaced out. That's going to make your ruffle look a lot better. I like to sew with the gathers facing up. This way I can kind of like redistribute them as it goes as well. And if I see anything that looks a bit funny, I can correct it as it goes under the machine. Obviously be careful not to stick your fingers under the needle. But I've actually heard several times the advice the exact opposite, to put the gathers on the bottom. This way the feed dogs are actually pulling your gathers along. So that's what works best for me in my machine. But if you want to do the other way around, it's also a very good method that I heard advised many times. So do it like me or do it the other way around, whatever works best for you. Okay, so now, per usual, we're going to trim our seam allowance. Be careful because the seam allowance is at 6mm. You can see that later seam here, but don't trim all the way there because you see a seam line there. Obviously, it's not the seam allowance. The seam allowance is just here at 6mm, so don't cut too far. Actually, you might prefer to cut on this side where you can see the one seam and it's much cleaner. Be very careful when you trim this seam allowance, because as there's the ruffle, there could easily be something that kind of like, you know, comes a bit, you know, I exaggerate, but like this in the middle, and you just cut across when you cut your seam allowance, and then you cut in the middle of your skirt. So this one, go slow and steady to make a very clean job. And as you trim your seam allowance, you're also going to trim as short as possible all of those long ends, because once you're going to fold the other side for the French seam, you do not want all of those long tails to come in your way. It's going to be very, very annoying to cut them off after your seam is finished. So do all of that now. So this is going to take a bit of time. It's a bit fiddly, but honestly, put a nice podcast or YouTube video on and, you know, and cut this carefully and slowly and enjoy the process. I have trimmed my seam allowance. I have pressed it. So now I am going to flick it, you know the drill, fold it nicely, put as many pins as you need, and we're going to sew this down here at 6mm, 1/4 of an inch, and it should fall exactly on this seam line, which is going to encase your two lines of gathering stitches. Not press this seam allowance, because I do not want to make the gathered too crisp. You're right, Milo, there? All right. And sorry, and now what I'm going to do is press the hem. So this is the wrong side that we have here, and we're going to press 1 centimeter, so 3/4 of an inch, and then about 2 centimeters, 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so now we are ready to sew this hem. Again, I'm not using pins, put as many pins as you need. You know, I used to have a lot of pins. I've been sewing for a while, so put the pins you need. You're going to sew all around the edge here to sew your hem. And just be mindful, if you have those seams, check that you're still sewing them in the same direction and that they're not twisting along the way. It's probably fine. It's a gathered skirt, so it's not going to show that much. But if you want a super clean finish inside out, be careful about those small details too. Okay, let's do this really long hem. Let's go. If you're choosing your own adventure, now is also the moment to check the overall length of your skirt. Keep in mind that there's still that little bit of extra fabric at the top to make your elastic casing, so kind of like account for that. But you can look at the length of the overall skirt and see if you want a bigger or smaller hem. The hem is now done. Our last step is going to be to create the casing for our elastic. Ooh. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my iron and I'm going to fold this by 0.5 centimeter, so 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to fold it a second time by the width of my elastic plus 1/4 inch, 5 millimeters. And that's just to have a little bit of room. So you're going to press it a first time here and then a second time, and you can check the width. So for example, here it's too small, a little bit bigger. This is a bit big, but you see what I mean. We want the elastic plus 0.5 centimeter, so 1/4 inch of extra space so that it's comfy. After you press this, we're going to sew all along, leaving an opening of 5 centimeters to be able to then thread the elastic in the channel. My casing is nice and pressed and ready to sew, and to make sure I don't forget to leave a little gap for threading the elastic, I have this clip reminding me that I need to stop there, the hemming. So let's sew this. I'm actually covered in thread from the project. So you're going to take your elastic and you're going to measure around your waist so that it's tight but still comfortable. It needs to hold the skirt up, but you want it to be comfortable. Obviously, if you want your skirt a lot lower waisted, you're going to measure it a lot lower. I personally like things nice and high on my waist, so I'm going to measure it here. I'm going to make markings to know kind of like where it starts and where it ends. And I recommend don't cut it quite right away. Thread it through your skirt first. And then after you thread it, we're going to just baste it a little bit. Try the skirt, see how it feels, because here I am kind of interfering with my fingers. Maybe if the elastic was sewn at this distance, it wouldn't feel quite the same. So I do like to first baste it, try the skirt on, see if it's comfortable, and then I go back, I re-pull the elastic out, finish it, and then we're gonna shut it. So this moment we're seeing how it feels, and we're going to see in a minute how we thread this into the case. So we're going to grab a safety pin, attach it to our elastic, and then grab our skirt, find where the gap has been left opened. Okay, here we go. Find a gap, and now I'm going to thread it inside of the casing, helping myself with the safety pin. Be careful at the same time that the other end here doesn't get lost into the casing as well. So once a lot of the elastic is inside, start making sure that this doesn't get lost in either. Okay, this is also going to take a little while. So what about we re-meet once I've finished threading all this? So that's it. Once it's threaded through, you kind of like pull really as much of the elastic as you can. The more elastic you're going to get out, the more comfortable it's going to be to sew. You find your marking, there it is. And now I'm going to baste this, try the skirt on, and then come back to actually sew it. I'm going to show you how I sew it in a very secure way. And one thing to maybe check as well before you baste and before you sew is that the elastic hasn't twisted in the casing. That'd be really annoying to have to reopen everything afterwards. To shut my elastic, I set my machine in a zigzag stitch and I go kind of all around the attachment and then kind of across as well, so it's very well secured. Okay, it's all threaded in. I have checked it, retightened it a little bit for my case. So now you have just this little gap to close. Make sure you switch it back to a straight stitch, don't zigzag over this. So we're just going to close this little gap here and then our skirt will be done. So I have closed it. What you can already do is pull a little bit on the elastic to spread the gathers, but that will also fall a little bit nicer the first time you wear it. So let's try this on and see how this looks. And that's it. That is the skirt finished. I hoped this video was helpful, and I hope that if you're trying to follow the choose your own adventure, that this was also a helpful video and give you the confidence to kind of design your own skirt. Personally, I find that this model is a little bit stiff. I really wish I had found a thinner linen to make this skirt to have something a little bit more flowy. But yeah, if you make this skirt following my tutorial, make sure you tag me on Instagram so I can see it. Like this video if you liked it, and don't hesitate to subscribe for future tutorials. And thank you so much for watching this video till the end. Don't forget that you can make anything. Bye!